The Life Story of John Summers Higbee, Preserving Family and Church History, Part 4. History of Provo, Utah, from 1849 to 1851. Parley P. Pratt wrote, "Sometime in December, having finished sowing wheat and rye, I started in company with Brother John Higbee and others for Utah Lake with a boat and a fish net. We traveled some 30 miles with our boat, etc., on an ox wagon, while some of us rode horseback. This distance brought us to the foot of Utah Lake, a beautiful sheet of fresh water, some 36 miles long by 15 broad. Here we launched our boat and tried our net, being probably the first boat and net ever used on this sheet of water in modern times. We sailed up and down the lake shore on its western side for many miles, but had only poor success in fishing. We, however, caught a few samples of mountain trout and other fish. After exploring the lake and valley for a day or two, the company returned home." John Summers Higbee's son, John Mount Higbee, was teamster for the trip. 50 years later, he wrote this letter about this first exploring, hunting, and fishing trip on Utah Lake. I drove a team with skiff and seine on a wagon that hauled the first wagon over point of mountain between Salt Lake and Utah valleys. We went up one little hollow and down another without throwing a shovel of dirt or cutting a bush. It was an exploring, hunting, and fishing party. Parley P. Pratt and John S. Higbee is all I remember. I think there was 6. Fished in Jordan where it empties out of Utah Lake. We drew the seine many times, but only caught 2 fish, trout. After a few days, we returned to Salt Lake. They later gathered information that indicated the lake trout went to deep water during the winter and that the west side of Utah Lake never was a prime trout fishing area. John Summers Higbee and Isaac Higbee Jr. fished a lot for others. They worked with William Wordsworth to seek out suitable fishing places on Utah Lake in order to establish fisheries and supply the market. Parley P. Pratt recorded the following in a letter to his brother Orson. "I was at Utah Lake last week, and of all the fisheries I ever saw, that exceeds all. I saw thousands caught by hand, both by Indians and whites. They simply put their hands into the stream and throw them out as fast as they can pick them up. 5,000 barrels of fish might be secured there annually, just as well as less." Brigham Young wrote, "I attended council on the 17th. The names of a company of 33 who were going to settle in Utah Valley were read. The company, a few days previously, had chosen John S. Higbee for president and bishop, his older brother Isaac Higbee Jr. for first counselor, and Dimmick B. Huntington as second counselor. John's wife, Judith, stayed behind in Salt Lake City taking care of the children, although John's son, Silas, who was about 9 years old, went with him. The original settlement at Provo, Fort Utah, was established March 12, 1849 by President John S. Higbee with Isaac Higbee and Dimmick B. Huntington counselors and about 30 families, or 150 persons, sent from Salt Lake City by President Brigham Young. Several log houses were erected, surrounded by a 14-foot palisade, 20 by 40 rods in size, with gates in the east and west ends, and a middle deck for a cannon. The fort was first located west of town, but was moved to what was known as Soyette Park in April 1850. It was later renamed North Park. This monument on Center Street in Provo still honors those Provo pioneers. The families and men who came from Salt Lake to Provo in 1849 are listed. President Brigham Young said, "I forwarded the above information to John S. Higbee and the brethren settled on the Provo River, advising them to speedily complete their fort, to keep near the settlement, to place their cannon on the top of the fort, to gather a sufficient quantity of round stones for grape shot, to secure and guard their horses and cattle, to keep a vigilant guard at night, to look out for the Indians, not to make presents to them, but if they would be friendly, to teach them to raise grain, and to order them to quit stealing." John Summers Higbee recorded, "In March of 1849, I was in charge of a company and sent to make a settlement in Utah Valley at Timpanogos, which we called Provo. We surveyed and drew numbers for city lots and did the same with farming land. We built a stockade for our protection against the Indians. This drawing of the fort shows the cabins where each family was located. There was a cannon in the middle, with gates on the east and west ends of the fort, and a corral at the southeast corner." John S. Higbee retained the presidency of these settlers only about 2 months, being released on the 27th of May, 1849, at his own request, on account of his family remaining in Salt Lake City. John wrote, "I went to Utah Valley with a company for form a new settlement, stayed there about 2 months, returned to Salt Lake City again. Many things transpired. My son, John M., went to California this past spring." John's older brother, Isaac Higbee Jr., replaced John as president of Fort Utah Colony. John visited the little colony again in September as part of a group that included Brigham Young, Willard Richards, and Thomas Bullock, among others. The trip took them 2 days. Along the way, they stopped at Brigham Young's farm to eat melons, and they stayed overnight at the Cottonwood settlement. After arriving at Fort Utah, they surveyed the area and decided on the location where the city of Provo would be built. Early in January 1850, Jerome Zabriskie, Richard Ivey, and John Stoddard went out from the fort in Utah Valley to hunt cattle. Shortly, they met an Indian who was known to them as Old Bishop, on account of his resemblance to Bishop Newell K. Whitney. He was wearing a shirt which Richard Ivey claimed was his. Old Bishop refused to give it up, saying, "I bought it," so they tried to take it away from him. He struggled against them, and he defended himself by drawing his bow. One of the men then shot him through the head, killing him instantly. They then dragged the corpse to the Provo River and sunk it under Box Elder Island. This is where the settlers had cut down trees to get logs for their houses. It was about a mile to the west of the fort. The Indians then became suspicious, instituted a search, and found the body. They then commenced depredations by stealing horses and cattle. The settlers in Fort Utah began making preparations to defend themselves and established a law to keep all Indians outside of the fort. John Summers Higbee recorded, "The hardships endured through the Indian depredations were very grievous and discouraging. The need of food and clothing serious. Some whole families lived months on fish, buttermilk, and a few roots they could dig. Armed men had to herd, guard stock, go with teams to work, and guard at night." In the winter of 1849 to 1850, measles spread from the settlers to the Ute camps, killing many and heightening tensions. Old Elk, who was sick with the measles, came in for some medicine. He went to Sister Hunt's house, where Alexander Williams saw him and took him by the nape of the neck and kicked him out of the fort. A company of immigrants on their way to the California goldfields camped near Provo. They traded guns and ammunition to the Indians for horses. The Indians used these weapons to attack the settlers. On January 31st, 1850, President Isaac Higbee Jr., who was stake president and leader, sent a report to Brigham Young that the Indians in Utah Valley had killed and stolen between 50 and 60 head of cattle and horses. He said that they were saucy and threatened to kill more cattle and would go and get other Indians to join them in killing the settlers in Utah Valley. Isaac further reported that the brethren in Fort Utah were agreed in asking the privilege of defending themselves against the Indians. Details of the murder and the events leading up to the hostilities were likely withheld, at least for a time, from church leaders in Brigham Young, so the request for help was granted. Governor Young dispatched 100 men to strengthen and protect the settlers. A series of battles commenced in February 1850, which resulted in the deaths of dozens of Ute Indians, including Old Elk. Joseph, son of President Isaac Higbee Jr., and a lad of 19, was one numbered among the men who took part in the Battle of Provo River. While the fighting was in progress on February 9, 1850, Joseph and a comrade were concealed behind a log. His companion saw that an Indian had discovered them and had a gun pointed in their direction. The young man warned Higbee of the danger and told him not to raise his head. Both lay behind the log for some time. At last, becoming very weary in the uncomfortable position and suffering from the intense cold, Joseph asked his companion if he thought it would be safe to take a look over the log. His friend urged him not to do so, but Joseph finally made the venture. The moment his head appeared above the log, a shot was fired, the bullet striking and breaking his neck. Joseph had a premonition before the battle that he would not survive the conflict, and he told his older sister Amanda of his forebodings. She urged him not to go out to fight, but he answered that he would not be a coward and would go, even if he knew he would be killed. It was the first death among the settlers in the first Indian War in Utah, and it cast a gloom over the little community. 18 other pioneers were wounded, so a log cabin was used as a hospital. Joseph was buried on Temple Hill, close to the BYU Mazer building. Later, when the cemetery was incorporated, his and other graves were moved to the Provo City Cemetery. Joseph's name is listed on this marker in the cemetery. The blow was especially severe to President Higbee, as Joseph was his only living son, and not for some time was he able to reconcile himself to the loss. According to the traditions of old settlers, comfort finally came through a dream given to Joseph's sister, wherein she saw him in the spirit world, happy in the work he had to do there. In 1851, the lives of George W. Bean and President Isaac Higbee Jr. were threatened. The Indians were angry over the killing of Old Elk and altogether welcomed an opportunity for revenge. President Higbee was awakened in the middle of the night by Chief Soyet, who came to warn him of Chief Walkara's intention to massacre everyone in the fort. Chief Soyet was Chief Walkara's older brother. Chief Soyet proffered his aid in helping the settlers to defend themselves. President Higbee gratefully accepted Chief Soyet's offer, and preparations for defense were made. At a large gathering of the Ute Indians, Chief Walkara urged his braves to go to Salt Lake and destroy the intruders, but Chief Soyet convinced Chief Walkara to change his mind. Chief Walkara intended to attack Fort Utah. Indians were heard all through the night shooting and howling around the fort. The men stood inside with their guns in hand, momentarily expecting to have to use them. Chief Walkara did not make the attack, however, as he had been warned that Chief Soyet stood ready to aid the settlers if he did. This was only the beginning of many years of tension and conflict between the settlers and the Indians. This ends Part 4. The life story of John Summers Higbee, preserving family and church history, is continued in Part 5, Mission to England. You can learn more about John in the life story of John Summers Higbee, A Mighty and Powerful Instrument in the Hands of the Lord, by Vachel C. Higbee. Available on Amazon. To see Vachel's other Higbee family history books, see her website, lanternhousebooks.com. Links to both websites are available in the description.